Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy. The high wind warning down in the Juneau Admiralty Island area that's been out for a couple of days ended at 3 p.m. this afternoon, and there are no other warning watches or advisories in the mainland zone areas at all. But there are some gale warnings out for areas of the Aleutians and the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula for tonight, as well as I believe the southern southeast coast. Anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to the marine section. Got a band of moisture moving northeastward here, and then just trailing on down. Could have been a few flurries and some clouds. It looks like it's breaking out behind as that moves through. A little more moisture, but even the heavier amounts up there, those amounts were quite light and didn't amount to very much at all. Clear and cold over the interior here. The white areas where the cloud or where the ground is cold. It's not really cloudiness, just the very cold temperatures at the surface now, running 20 to 40, 45 below zero to maybe even closer to 50 below here over the northwest territories of Canada. Otherwise, a lot of clear skies. We had this weak disturbance here early on, bringing some moisture over the southern panel. You can see that's all moving off to the east. Nothing following it in behind, but clear skies. And good high pressure building in here now over the Bering Sea, as well as at the surface, all across interior Alaska into northwest Canada. And that kind of holding this stuff back to the west. As you can see, this frontal system here bringing some 40 to 50 knot winds to the western Aleutians with some rain. Another band here spreading moisture up across Adak and Atka, and to a lesser extent the Fox Islands. And then you got, looks like a lot of clear skies here over the eastern Bering Sea. This is the infrared shot here. And then the warmer temperatures actually breaking through to the map underlying this up here over the Bering Sea. This is mostly clear through this area, but showing up as dark there because of the infrared shot that's overlaid here, which shows up the cold temperatures under the Arctic high over northwest Canada quite well. The system down here, well to the south moving by, just brought a little bit of moisture to the southern areas, and then high pressure in over the interior all the way up to the Arctic coast. Another center just off the eastern coast there. And then this weak disturbance brushing by, bringing some skips of snow up to the northwest part of the state. Otherwise, big storm just off the map there. Not going to really do much, but stay out by the Kamchatka Peninsula area as this frontal boundary sort of holds in place and gradually weakens. So you look for a chance of rain from Atka to Adak on up towards Shimia, and then changing into maybe a mixed rain and snow condition there around Attu Island, and then snow onto the northwest. And tonight still some light flurry chances with low clouds, possible fog, and IFR conditions or marginal VFR in areas there along that trough right up to the western Arctic coast. But clear skies here to the east, and cold temperatures continuing well below zero, more like seasonable now. The warm December, kind of just a memory, with cold temperatures all the way down into the southeast coast. Still pretty gusty winds today. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, the entire northern part of the Panhandle, seeing winds 40 to 60 miles an hour, and in some cases even gusts up around 70 miles an hour in the channeled areas. But those all kind of in a general downward trend. They're going to drop off a little bit, but not end completely. Be watching the system down here to the south begin moving northward, and that's going to probably tighten the gradient up a little bit more. But for tomorrow, it should begin, the pressure falls as this comes northward, should begin to pick the winds back up out along the coast there. But you can see still enough lines across the Panhandle to keep that outflow from the interior, keep it dry and cold, and clear skies and fairly light winds. Could be a little brisk, but not too bad here through the mountain passes. And temperatures below zero, well below zero again. Places like Willows, the Sitna Valley, definitely Copper River Basin, and on up to the north, 20 to 30 to possibly 40, 45, or even 50 below zero over the Yukon Flats. And maybe a little milder up here where that moisture drops southeastward with the high redeveloping back toward Wrangell Island. Look for that trough to bring some clouds and areas of light snow, possible fog here to the western Arctic coast, but again, amounts nothing significant at all. High pressure over the Bering Sea and the front staying out to the west along with any rain and snow that's left in it. Then for Tuesday, it kind of reorients itself, a new wave forms and moves up toward the Attu area there with some rain, but dry conditions. Looks pretty good with ridging over the central Aleutians. Northeast winds now coming down, turn kind of easterly, but they'll be lightest there for the central zones. Back to the west, northeast, 15 to 30. And then along this front here, as it rotates back to the west, look for those winds to increase, possibly coming up, well, will be gale force here ahead of this front into the Kodiak Island marine areas, as well as up across the Barrens, possibly into the North Gulf coastal areas with rain, Kodiak Island, or a mixture of, and snow up along the coastline. And then behind the front with that push from the southeast, warmer conditions. So whatever starts out as snow, changing over to mixed rain and snow, over to rain here, especially for the southern half of the southeast coast. And could get a little interesting up here depending on how much moisture actually makes it up that far to the north as it collides and overruns the very cold air mass that's now in place, very cold dry air mass that's now in place over the entire southeast coast. For the temperatures today over the interior, minus 35, all 4 p.m. readings there at 35 below. Fort Yukon, 27 below at Arctic Village, up some from yesterday. Minus 14 at Barrow, minus 20 at Dead Horse, 7 above though at Kaktovik, as well as Point Lay. Otherwise, Wainwright, minus 8, 19 over at Cape Lisburne. 5 degrees there at Kotzebue, and a minus 9 Selawik, minus 8 at Ambler. And we've got 22 below zero this afternoon at Fairbanks and a minus 28 at Tanana, with McGrath minus 19, Nenana at 24 below, Talkeetna minus 9 this afternoon, and Gulkana at 16 below with a 22 at Cordova. Just 11 degrees in Palmer, while Anchorage had 17, 29, or actually that 17 is Kenai, 29 down in Homer. Seward 25 degrees. And going on to the next chart for the southeast coast, temperatures ranging from the mid-20s to the mid-30s, except colder up toward Haines, Skagway, and those areas down into the teens. Otherwise, Kodiak Island, mid-30s, both at Akiak and the state airport there at Kodiak, with a 14-degree reading at King Salmon. The Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, just a little above zero there at Bethel with 3 degrees. Otherwise, St. Mary's had 18, and Sleepmute at minus 6, 13 over at Unalakleet, 32 up at Savunga with Nome at 14 degrees, 21 at Shishmaref, upper 30s to lower 40s for the peninsula, and St. Paul at 37 degrees. For the Aleutians, about the same as the Pribilofs, with temperatures near 40 all the way out. And for the lows tonight, close to 40, 45, in some cases even 50 below zero here, over just about anywhere in the eastern interior from Tok all the way up across the Yukon Flats, with milder conditions going back above zero out to the west. And into the lower 20s forecast for Nome tomorrow, at least the generated forecast. and 26 down along the southwest coast at Makoriak. Otherwise, eastern Arctic coast, 0 degrees at Kaktovik, and also Dead Horse, but minus 31, the forecast high for Northway, and anywhere from 5 below to 15 above here for the areas south of the Alaska Range, Copper River Basin staying below 0. Temperatures ranging again from the upper teens over the northern panhandle to upper 20s to mid 30s to the south. Flying weather, most of the moisture staying south of the area here, but some marginal VFR may lift northward, especially late in the day as that frontal boundary and system begins to take a jog a little bit up to the north. So look for conditions to begin to deteriorate over the southern areas. No change in the north, good VFR all along the North Gulf Coast. Of course, Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, Kodiak looking really good, all the way up into the interior. And with that trough coming in from the west-northwest, look for some marginal VFR. Isolated areas of IFR, especially Barrow down towards maybe as far down as Point Lay, and then on the upslope areas of the western Brooks Range on the north side. Also could be some lower conditions here, the northern coast of the Seward Peninsula through the Strait, IFR possible on the north shore of St. Lawrence Island, VFR in the south shore, with Pribilofs, maybe optimistically VFR the entire day as this stuff here stays off to the west and northwest. And it could be a band of marginal VFR here across the southern Bering Sea, dropping in across the central Aleutians. And for the passes individually, Anaktuvik looking VFR with Adigan, same forecast, north and south, VFR conditions, north entrance, both entrances VFR. For the passes for Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR conditions, either entrance, and for Rainy, VFR, west and east, windy, VFR, north and south. Isabel, nothing but VFR, Celine's visibility is unlimited for Mentasta and Tanita, as well as Portage, Chilkoot and White, good VFR. Freezing levels, maybe 1 to 2,000 feet up into southern Alaska here, back down across Bristol Bay. Really stretching it, pulling it this far to the northwest, but it could be, there would be kind of a warmer layer aloft definitely in this area, and then back down to across, we'll say Heidelberg, could see 2,000 feet, or 32 degrees occurring at 2,000 feet. And this for late tonight, early tomorrow morning, surface across the Bering Sea, dropping down, then the hugging the coastline type of thing we've seen continuing into tomorrow. And the icing threats, freezing level of 8 to 9,000 feet out here in the west with that moisture in the stalled frontal boundary out there of the maybe some light isolated, light to moderate rime icing, isolated though in those areas, and even over the southern southeast coast, just a chance of some light stuff showing up there, but increasing though tomorrow afternoon and then into the overnight period tomorrow night, and certainly into the following day on Tuesday. Upper level wind flow chart showing why here. Upper low pressure south of Kodiak Island, Pacific jet, strong Pacific jet, takes a turn to the north tomorrow. So you got a ridge right over the panhandle, but that's going to tend to pull this moisture northward in time. And again, looks like a surge of warmer air pushing on up tomorrow night and Tuesday, which could make for some interesting weather at that time, especially over the central and northern areas. Otherwise, upper high pressure and fair conditions, but cold over just about all of the remainder of Alaska. For the 9,000-foot winds, northeasterlies, starting out in the light side here for the eastern Gulf Coast and picking up Kodiak Island, 25 to 40 knots, even stronger out in the Gulf of Alaska, or the southern Gulf of Alaska. Southeasterlies about 35 coming up from Dixon Entrance. Big high pressure out here from the Russian Far East all the way down across the Bering. And northeasterlies 35 to 40 knots, easterlies 30 knots, cutting off and then going southeast at 40, but not too bad here over the central Aleutians. 3,000 feet, much the same pattern. Light winds though, 5 to 15 over the interior from a mostly east-northeast direction. Variable to west 15 there north of the ridge axis along the Arctic coast, again associated with that trough coming in from the northwest, and then northerlies 20 to 35 here right down the coastline, dropping off a little bit southeast. So notice the southwest flow here and the trough coming right across the Queen Charlottes. That's going to kind of pivot back to the northwest and draw that moisture and warmer air up tomorrow night and into Tuesday. Otherwise, turbulence, occasional light to isolated moderate chop here along the western Alaska Range. Also maybe a little bit out over the eastern Aleutians and the western areas. That's about it. Almost nothing really significant. Most significant will be here over the southeast coast, mechanical turbulence due to the offshore flow and the tight gradient remaining across this area. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space, and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
Kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat so
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though, and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It's a lot different
just
than Earth.
moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make 1 lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
Takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles up. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites, and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot, because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
The same speed.
Right.
Okay.
The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot,
I see.
and it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture. You can replay that, and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called, because they're stationary in appearance, and they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures. If you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see, is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites.
Okay.
That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is we're up on the very top of the planet, and for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book, but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit,
Okay.
which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIIRS sensor. That's an acronym there.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail. The kind of detail, because you're close in.
Very high resolution.
You couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites. The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by, and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by, and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits. Each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion. The same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun, they govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right, okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Amazing stuff. It's
a growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on GINA and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
Welcome back. 20 to 25 knots, still from the northeast basically here on these speeds. Much higher gusts though out of the bays and other channeled areas. Look for gales down here, mostly from the east or a more easterly direction down on the south coast. Otherwise, small craft advisories for the remainder of the coastline here. Higher gusts as well. And not much change into Tuesday, except going northeasterly, 30 to 35 knots. Should cover it pretty good here for the southern areas. Small craft advisories everywhere else, still from the northeast. A little more channeled northerlies though for Lynn Canal and probably Stevens Passage with much higher gusts. For the Cook Inlet area, northeast, 15 to 20, especially through the Forelands and southward, picking up 25 knots down across Kamishak Bay and Shelikof Strait. 30 knots, so a full small craft advisory going for the waters east to Kodiak Island, and small craft advisories all the way up across the North Gulf Coast with seas running anywhere from 9 to as high as 14 feet. And on Tuesday, we'll go gales here with 35 to 40 knot winds now. Again, that front swinging northward and pulling back to the west. Ahead of it, gale force winds out of the northeast. Small craft advisory, Shelikof Strait. 15 to 20 knots, Kamishak Bay through Cook Inlet, and northeast 20 with higher gusts for Prince William Sound. Northeast 30, Bristol Bay, pick up to about 35 knots tomorrow, so gales on this side of the peninsula with small craft advisories on the south side from Cape Sarachev all the way up to Sitkinak. And for Tuesday, same direction, all northeasterlies, but speeds diminishing out here across the peninsula, coming down to 20 knots, but still small craft advisories, which are down a little bit here, 25 to 30 knots southwest of Kodiak Island and for Bristol Bay. For the Aleutians, northeast, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots here across the Fox Islands, all northeasterly, turning east, Adak and Atka, but only 15 to 20 knots and kind of a light wind condition out here, and then southerlies back up to 20 knots toward Shimia. And then that western zones, good gales, maybe even a storm warning might come out for Tuesday here for the far western zone. Gales there across Amchitka and Kiska. Easterlies 20 knots, central zones, and northeast 20 to 25 with small craft advisories around the Fox Islands. For the southwest coast, 25 to 30 knot brisk wind advisories going here, or small craft advisories. Small crafts for the Pribilofs and northern Bering Sea. St. Lawrence Island, though, coming down to 20 knots, but back up to 25 knots the following day. And from Nunivak Island southward here, could see a northeasterly gale, northeast 25 for the Pribilofs all the way up to St. Matthew Island. Eastern Arctic coast, mostly westerlies on the light side, 10 to 15, and then kind of northwest, 10 to 15 for the central and western coast. Pretty light winds tomorrow in store for the areas all the way down to the Bering Strait. And then those pick up a little bit and turn more northeasterly for Tuesday there with 20-knot winds, and northeast 15 for the western coast. North or northwest, basically north, light north winds, 10 knots for the central coast. Then northwest here on the east side, 10 to 15. And for tonight, you can see just clear skies all the way through here. Just this leftover moisture of the very weak disturbance, keeping a few flurries in along the Yukon Delta coastline, maybe the Seward Peninsula, a little more extensive up here where the main trough is, especially this evening, and then that'll tend to shift eastward a little bit, and but not move out completely. It's really just trapped under a big area of high pressure here. This front bringing some rain and gusty winds into the western central Aleutians, and it's continued windy, but general downward trend now. Lost the warnings there for the southeast coast, but look for a little bit of an increase, some moisture nudging northward. Could bring some mixed precipitation into the southern areas, but staying dry and cold to the north and windy. Clear and cold here over the interior up into the Yukon Valley. A few more clouds though and some flurries north of the Brooks Range, but some of that persisting down the coastline and out into the St. Lawrence Island area and the Bering Sea. And then this front makes a pretty good jog up to the north and northwest to about this position in 48 hours, with snow changing to rain and gusty winds along the Panhandle, with could bring some snow to Yakutat, over to Cordova, and possibly in toward Whittier, but mostly along the coastline here. Kodiak Island, kind of a hit and miss there, or a toss-up as to which way it could start as snow and then tend to go to rain, with the flow becoming more easterly. Otherwise, looks like a little breezier conditions over the interior and continued cold. Let's look at the weather. Thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.